The scent of candle smoke and expensive perfume clung to the air of Harrington Hall, a familiar prelude to another season of quiet humiliation. For the 5th year, I sat in a secluded corner, my dove-gray gown a conscious choice to blend into the pale wallpaper. An elegant, pitying Mrs. Croft approached. "Miss Vance, would you care for some refreshment?" she asked, her voice soft. "No, thank you, Mrs. Croft. I am quite comfortable," I replied, a practiced lie that did not reach my eyes. Comfort was a luxury I had long forgotten. At 23, I was firmly on the shelf, a fate sealed not by any great lack of beauty, but by my father's empty coffers and mounting debts. Across the glittering ballroom, my younger sister Seraphina laughed with a circle of debutantes, her vivacity a stark contrast to my quiet resignation. She possessed a natural charm I had never cultivated, an ability to secure friendships despite our family's diminished circumstances. "She's with the Lady Isolde Ashford set again," my mother, Lady Vance, observed, appearing briefly at my side with a fan she didn't wield. "At least one of my daughters understands how to secure a decent match?" I nodded, acknowledging the familiar sting of her pragmatism, a wound that never quite healed. "You could learn from her example," she sighed, before drifting away to engage with an acquaintance who had not yet entirely cut their connection. The orchestra began a new set, and couples formed lines across the polished floor. I watched, my expression carefully neutral, masking the longing that stubbornly resided within my heart. It was then that the crowd seemed to part like a sea before Moses, and a murmur rippled through the assembly. My breath caught as I glanced up to see the cause of the disturbance. Lord Alaric Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, had entered the ballroom. Tall and imposing, dressed impeccably in black evening attire that contrasted sharply with his crisp white cravat, he moved with the confidence of a man who needed no one's approval. At 32, he was at the height of his power, feared in business for his ruthless acumen, whispered about in drawing rooms for his scandalous liaisons, and universally acknowledged as the most eligible yet unattainable bachelor in England. They called him the Shadow Duke, not only for his preference for dark attire, but for the way he could subtly destroy a man's fortune or a woman's reputation with a whispered word. His presence was rare enough to cause a sensation. Every unmarried lady, and many married ones, followed his movements with barely concealed interest, the candlelight glinting off his dark coat as he strode. I observed him with detached curiosity. Men like the Duke of Blackwood existed in a different world than mine, one of power, privilege, and possibility. Our paths, I was certain, would never cross, until they did. His penetrating gaze swept the room, seemingly in search of someone. I thought nothing of it until I realized with a jolt of disbelief that his eyes had settled on me. I blinked, certain I was mistaken, but when I looked again, he was moving purposefully in my direction, cutting through the crowd with determination. I glanced behind me, convinced he must be approaching someone else, but there was only the wall and a potted palm. When I turned back, he stood before me, tall and imposing, his features sharp and aristocratic, his eyes the color of a winter storm. "Miss Vance, I presume?" His voice was deep, cultured, with the confidence of a man who rarely had his wishes denied. I rose on unsteady legs, executing a perfect curtsy despite my shock. "Your Grace, you have me at a disadvantage." A smile that did not reach his eyes curved his lips. "I make it my business to know everyone worth knowing in London society, Miss Vance." The statement was so patently false, I was decidedly not worth knowing by society's standards, that I nearly laughed. Instead, I raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Then your intelligence gatherers have led you astray, Your Grace." Something flickered in his eyes, surprised perhaps at my candor. Around us, the ballroom had grown quieter, nearby conversations faltering as people strained to overhear our exchange. "On the contrary," he replied, his voice lowering to a timbre that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. "I believe they have led me precisely where I needed to be." The orchestra began the opening notes of a waltz, a dance still considered daringly intimate. The Duke extended his gloved hand to me, his gaze never leaving mine. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question, but a command, softly delivered, yet unmistakable in its authority. I knew I should refuse. Dancing with the Duke of Blackwood would invite speculation, gossip, and inevitable disappointment. 5 years of cultivating invisibility had been my shield against society's cruelty. One dance could shatter that protection. Yet my hand moved of its own accord, settling into his palm like a bird coming to rest. Yes. As he led me onto the floor, every eye in the ballroom followed us. Seraphina's mouth hung open in an unladylike gape. Lady Isolde Ashford, the season's reigning diamond, with her golden curls and substantial dowry, watched with narrowed eyes as the Duke, whom everyone believed would eventually offer for her, instead took the hand of the invisible Miss Vance. The room, illuminated by chandeliers, felt like a stage set for our unexpected performance. "Everyone is staring," I murmured as the Duke's hand settled at my waist with surprising gentleness. "Let them," he replied simply, before sweeping me into the waltz with practiced ease. Dancing with him was like being caught in the eye of a storm, a moment of perfect suspended calm while chaos swirled around us. He moved with fluid grace that belied his imposing stature, guiding me through the steps as if we had danced 100 times before. "You dance well, Miss Vance," he observed, his expression inscrutable. "The benefit of 5 seasons of observation, Your Grace," I replied. "One has ample time to study technique when not participating." Again, that flicker in his eyes. "You speak quite frankly, a habit my mother despairs of correcting." I found myself relaxing slightly, the rhythm of the dance grounding me. "May I ask why you've chosen to dance with me this evening? Surely there are more advantageous partners available to you." The Duke's grip tightened almost imperceptibly on my waist. "I find that advantage is a relative concept, Miss Vance. What appears disadvantageous to some may be precisely what others seek." "And what do you seek, Your Grace?" His gaze intensified, seeming to look beyond my carefully composed exterior to something deeper. "A woman who understands the value of directness. A woman without illusions." The waltz ended before I could formulate a response. The Duke escorted me back to my corner, bowed formally over my hand, and instead of departing, leaned closer. "I would speak with you further, Miss Vance. Perhaps you might join me on the terrace in 10 minutes' time." It was improper, scandalously so. Yet I found myself nodding before I could consider the wisdom of such a meeting. The Duke straightened, gave me a look that seemed to contain a warning, and strode away, leaving whispers and speculation in his wake. 10 minutes later, having slipped away from the ballroom with a whispered excuse to Mrs. Croft, I stood on the moonlit terrace, my shawl pulled tightly around my shoulders against the spring night's chill. "Miss Vance," the Duke's voice came from the shadows before he emerged, his tall figure silhouetted against the light from the ballroom windows. "Your Grace." My voice was steady despite the impropriety of our meeting. "I confess I'm curious about what matter could be so urgent as to require a clandestine conversation." "I require a wife," he stated without preamble. I blinked, certain I had misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "I require a wife," he stated, his voice deep and even, without preamble. I blinked, certain the moonlight on the terrace had distorted my hearing. "I beg your pardon?" "I require a wife," he repeated, moving a step closer. His features, now clearer in the soft glow, remained unyielding. "And I believe you would suit my purposes admirably." "Your purposes?" I echoed, my mind struggling to piece together his audacious words. "My brother, Lord George, and his wife passed 6 months ago," he began, his tone unwavering, though I caught a flicker of pain in his eyes. "A boating accident on Lake Geneva. They left behind a daughter, my niece, Lyra. She is 5 years old and currently in the care of her maternal grandparents, the Albrights." "I'm very sorry for your loss, Your Grace," I managed, the formality feeling impossibly stiff in the face of such a personal tragedy. "But I fail to see—" "The Albrights have petitioned the courts for permanent guardianship of Lyra," he cut in, his gaze steady. "They claim my bachelor status and certain aspects of my reputation make me an unsuitable guardian for a young girl." Understanding dawned with a chilling clarity. "And a wife would make you appear more suitable." "Precisely," he nodded, as if I had merely solved a complex puzzle. "The court hearing is in 2 months. I need to present a stable, respectable household before then." I found my voice laced with a skepticism that surprised even myself. "But surely someone of your standing could have any number of suitable brides. Lady Isolde Ashford, for instance, has made her interest quite clear." The Duke's expression hardened, a fleeting shadow crossing his face. I have no interest in Lady Isolde or any woman who seeks the title of Duchess above all else. What I need, Miss Vance, is a practical arrangement with a woman who harbors no romantic illusions about marriage to me. And you believe I fit that description because— The question hung, challenging and direct. Because you have observed society from its margins for years, you understand its hypocrisies and cruelties. You speak directly when others would simper and flatter. He paused, then added with brutal honesty, and your family's financial situation is dire enough that a practical arrangement would be welcome. Heat rose to my cheeks, not from maidenly embarrassment, but a sharp flash of indignation. You've investigated my family's finances. I investigate everything that concerns me, Miss Vance. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, never wavered. And what exactly would this practical arrangement entail? I asked, forcing my voice to remain level. Marriage, of course. You would become the Duchess of Blackwood, mistress of Ravenwood Abbey in Yorkshire, and stepmother to Lyra. Your father's debts would be settled, and a generous allowance arranged for your parents and sister. He outlined the terms with chilling precision. In return, you would provide the respectability I need to secure guardianship of my niece. And after the guardianship is secured, what then? The shadowed garden beyond the terrace seemed to mirror the uncertainty of the future he proposed. The Duke's gaze remained steady. We would continue our arrangement. You would have your own suite of rooms at Ravenwood. Your obligations would be social in nature, hosting necessary gatherings, appearing at my side when required. Beyond that, your time would be your own. A marriage in name only, then. A flicker in his eyes, too quick to interpret, acknowledged my words. Unless mutually agreed otherwise. He left the statement hanging in the cool night air. What was dignity worth when one's family teetered on the brink of ruin? I turned away, moving to the stone balustrade, my fingers tracing the cold rock. It should have been offensive, this cold, calculated proposal. Yet wasn't it more honest than the false flattery and empty promises that characterized so many marriages I had witnessed? And what were my alternatives? Another 5 seasons of sitting against walls, watching Seraphina marry while I myself became the spinster aunt, dependent on the charity of others? You need not answer immediately, the Duke said, breaking the silence. I will call upon you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. We can discuss the terms more thoroughly. I turned back to face him, a sudden resolve hardening my gaze. And if I refuse? For the first time, a sliver of uncertainty crossed his austere features. Then I shall have to seek another solution. Another practical bride, you mean? I challenged. Yes. The admission was candid, though he added almost as an afterthought. Though I suspect I would be hard-pressed to find one who intrigues me as you do, Miss Vance. Before I could respond to this unexpected statement, the terrace doors opened, spilling light and the muted sound of music into our private conversation. The Duke stepped away from me with practiced ease, his composure perfectly restored. Consider my proposal, he said quietly, his gaze holding mine. Until tomorrow, Miss Vance. With a formal bow, he departed, leaving whispers and speculation in his wake, and me alone with a decision that would alter the course of my life forever. The wedding had been a quiet affair at St. George's in London a fortnight later, witnessed only by my immediate family and a handful of the Duke's associates. The absence of society at such a significant union had caused nearly as much gossip as the hasty nature of our engagement. Soon after, Lord Alaric Thorne, Duke of Blackwood, and I, Elara Vance, now Duchess of Blackwood, began our journey to Ravenwood Abbey in Yorkshire. The estate loomed against the late autumn sky like something from a fevered dream, Gothic spires reaching toward the clouds. Windows like watchful eyes pierced stone walls darkened by centuries of Yorkshire rain. As the ducal carriage approached through an avenue of ancient oaks, I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the chill. It's rather imposing, isn't it? I murmured, more to myself than to my new husband, seated across from me. Alaric glanced up from the correspondence he had been reading, his brow furrowed in concentration, a faint, almost invisible, wax seal on one of the documents. Ravenwood has stood for over 4 centuries. It was built to withstand both the elements and enemies. Does your grace have many enemies? The question slipped out before I could reconsider it. His lips quirked in what might have been amusement. Every man of consequence has enemies, Duchess. And please, when we are alone, I would prefer you use my given name. We agreed upon that. Alaric, I amended, the name still foreign on my tongue, despite having been married to him for 2 weeks. The carriage rattled over the stone bridge that crossed a swift-flowing river before beginning the final ascent to the house. I straightened my traveling coat, suddenly conscious of my appearance. I would soon be meeting the staff of Ravenwood as their new mistress, a role I had never been trained for, having been raised with modest expectations in a household that had been reducing its servants yearly. There is no need for anxiety, Alaric said, observing me with those penetrating gray eyes. Mrs. Beaumont, the housekeeper, has been informed of our arrival and will have prepared everything to your comfort. I'm not anxious, I replied, lifting my chin, merely contemplative. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Of course, my mistake. The carriage came to a stop before the imposing entrance of Ravenwood. Footmen appeared as if by magic, opening the carriage door and lowering the steps. Alaric descended first, then turned to offer his hand to me. As I placed my gloved fingers in his, I was struck again by the contradictions of our situation. We were legally bound and yet strangers. I wore his ring and bore his title, and yet knew almost nothing of the man beyond the carefully worded agreement we had signed in my father's study 2 days after his proposal. The staff was assembled in 2 neat lines in the grand entrance hall, a sea of black and white uniforms beneath the vaulted ceiling and ancestral portraits. Mrs. Beaumont, a dignified woman of middle years, stepped forward with a curtsy. Your Grace, welcome home, and may I be the first to welcome Her Grace, the Duchess, to Ravenwood. Thank you, Mrs. Beaumont, Alaric replied with the easy authority of one accustomed to command. I trust all is in order. Yes, Your Grace. The Duchess's rooms have been prepared according to your instructions, and dinner will be served at 7. I smiled warmly at the housekeeper. Thank you, Mrs. Beaumont. I look forward to becoming acquainted with you and all the staff. If the housekeeper was surprised by such friendliness from a duchess, she concealed it well. It would be my pleasure to conduct you on a tour of the house tomorrow morning, Your Grace, after you've had time to rest from your journey. That would be most helpful. Alaric placed a proprietary hand at the small of my back, a gesture that sent an unexpected warmth through me, despite the formality of our arrangement. Mrs. Beaumont will show you to your rooms now. I have some business matters to attend to in my study, but I shall join you for dinner. With that, he was gone, striding away down a corridor with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. I watched him go, struck by the realization that this imposing house and this enigmatic man were now the center of my existence. Mrs. Beaumont led me up a grand staircase past portraits of stern-faced Thornes who seemed to judge me with painted eyes. The family wing is in the east section of the house, Your Grace. His Grace has had the Duchess's suite entirely refurbished for your arrival. That was thoughtful of him, I replied, though I wondered if it had been thoughtfulness or simply another detail in his meticulous planning. The Duchess's suite proved to be a revelation, a sitting room in soft blues and creams that opened into a bedchamber of understated elegance. Beyond that lay a dressing room and a private bathing chamber with modern plumbing, a luxury I had not experienced in my father's increasingly shabby home. His Grace selected the furnishings himself, Mrs. Beaumont informed me with a note of approval. Most unusual, but he was most specific about certain details. I ran my fingers over the spines of books arranged on a small shelf, novels and poetry collections, including several of my favorites. Had Alaric chosen these, or had it been the work of an efficient secretary given instructions to furnish a lady's room? I caught my reflection in a polished mirror on the wall, seeing a duchess, yes, but still a stranger to herself in this grand new world. Your lady's maid, Miss Eliza, will attend you shortly, Mrs. Beaumont continued. Is there anything else you require in the meantime, Your Grace? No, thank you. This is all quite overwhelming. Once alone, I moved to the window, which offered a view of the estate's grounds, formal gardens giving way to wilder parkland, and beyond that the rolling moors stretching to the horizon. It was beautiful in its stark way, so different from the manicured gardens of London townhouses or the gentle countryside of Hampshire, where I had been raised. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Miss Eliza, a young woman with clever eyes and capable hands, who helped me change from my traveling costume into a more comfortable afternoon dress. Throughout the process, I attempted to establish a rapport with my new maid, finding her responsive but carefully reserved, no doubt uncertain of her new mistress's temperament. After Miss Eliza departed, promising to return to help me dress for dinner, I decided to explore my new domain. The sprawling corridors of Ravenwood Abbey held a quiet dignity, a hushed testament to centuries of the Thorne family's presence. As I explored, my steps often echoed, reminding me of the house's imposing silence. Yet instead of feeling daunted, I felt a strange sense of purpose. This grand estate, with all its shadowed halls and ancestral portraits, was now my domain. I found myself drawn to a door tucked away in the family wing, its polished oak hinting at a history untold. Inside, a music room lay bathed in the soft, diffused light of an autumn afternoon. A pianoforte, dark and gleaming, stood against one wall, its keys a silent invitation. I ran my fingers over the ivory, a tremor of anticipation running through me. Though my own skill was modest, I longed to fill the silence with something beautiful, something of myself. I pressed a single key, and a soft, resonant chord bloomed in the air, a tender assertion of my presence in this new, formidable home. "You play?" The deep voice startled me, sending a jolt through my frame. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, to find Lord Alaric Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, filling the doorway. His tall, imposing figure, usually so commanding, seemed to soften just slightly as he looked at the piano. His footsteps had been utterly silent on the thick carpet, a disconcerting habit I was quickly learning to associate with him. "A little," I admitted, my voice breathy, though not with any great skill, I confess. He stepped fully into the room, his gaze resting on the instrument. "My mother was an accomplished pianist. This was her favorite room?" It was the first truly personal detail he had shared with me since our marriage, a crack in the formidable facade he presented to the world. A quiet empathy stirred within me. "She has passed, then?" I asked softly. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement of his broad shoulders. "When I was 16, my father followed 3 years later." I felt a genuine pang of sorrow for the young man he must have been, burdened by such loss. "I am very sorry for your loss, Your Grace." The words felt inadequate, yet sincere, and I saw a flicker of something unreadable in his winter storm eyes. "It was many years ago," Alaric replied, the familiar mask of composure returning, though his gaze lingered on the piano. "You must feel free to use the instrument whenever you wish." I found myself relaxing slightly, the rhythm of our unconventional connection slowly taking shape. "Thank you, Alaric," I said, testing his given name, which still felt foreign on my tongue. "I shall. When will your niece join us at Ravenwood? Lyra, is it?" At the mention of the child, a subtle shift occurred in his expression. The austerity in his features softened, a fleeting warmth in his gray eyes. "Not for several weeks yet. The court proceedings are progressing, but there are formalities to be observed. The Albrights have agreed to allow her to visit next week, however, so that she might become acquainted with you." He watched me, a thoughtful assessment in his gaze. "I look forward to meeting her," I replied truthfully. "I believe you will find her a delightful child, though somewhat reserved. She has suffered much change in her young life." I recalled my own sister, Seraphina, so much younger, grappling with the sudden loss of our family's comforts. Children are often more resilient than we give them credit for. With patience and consistency, I'm sure she will adjust to her new circumstances. My faint smile was for Seraphina, for the confusion I had seen in her young eyes when our world had crumbled. "You speak as if from experience," Alaric observed, his thoughtful gaze still fixed on me. "My sister Seraphina is 7 years my junior. After our circumstances changed, she struggled to understand why certain luxuries were no longer available to us. Children feel such losses keenly, even when they cannot articulate their confusion." He nodded slowly, a new interest dawning in his eyes. "You have an unusual perspective, Elara." "A benefit of being invisible in society, Alaric," I replied, a touch of self-deprecating humor in my voice. "One observes a great deal when not the subject of attention oneself." His lips quirked in what might have been amusement, the first genuine smile I had seen from him. It transformed his austere features into something approaching handsomeness. "Yet you are not invisible now," he pointed out. "As Duchess of Blackwood, you will find yourself the object of intense scrutiny." A daunting prospect indeed. Was it not an irony that my quiet strength, honed in the shadows, would now be exposed to the harsh glare of society? "A daunting prospect," I admitted, "though I suspect most of society will be watching for signs of regret on your part rather than missteps on mine." To my surprise, he laughed then, a deep, genuine sound that resonated through the room. "You continue to speak with refreshing candor. It is most unusual in my experience." "I hope it is not disagreeable to you," I said, finding myself relaxing slightly in the warmth of his rare amusement. His expression grew serious once more, the faint smile vanishing. "On the contrary, our arrangement may be unconventional, Elara, but I would not have you fear speaking your mind to me, particularly in matters concerning Lyra's welfare or the management of this household." I felt a flicker of genuine connection, a tentative understanding forming between us. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by this concession. "I shall endeavor not to abuse the privilege." A clock somewhere in the distant halls of Ravenwood chimed the hour, its clear, metallic notes breaking the moment of nascent intimacy. The sound seemed to pull us back from the precipice of personal revelation, returning us to the customary formality. Alaric straightened, resuming his usual composure. The first fortnight at Ravenwood established patterns that would define my new life. My days were filled with learning the intricacies of managing a great house, consulting with Mrs. Beaumont, the efficient housekeeper, and Mr. Finch, the quiet butler, about menus and household schedules. Gradually, I began to win the trust of staff who had grown accustomed to serving a bachelor duke with little interest in domestic matters. Alaric, however, remained an enigma. He was unfailingly courteous but distant, joining me for dinner each evening, where our conversation revolved around estate matters or impersonal London gossip. He never sought my company beyond these formal interactions, disappearing into his study or riding out across the moors for hours at a time. I found myself oddly disappointed by this strict adherence to the terms of our agreement. Though I had entered the marriage with no romantic expectations, some small, foolish part of me had hoped for companionship at least. What did I truly expect from a marriage of convenience? A distant respect, perhaps, but certainly not this quiet ache of being so near, yet so far. The anticipated visit from Lyra was a welcome diversion from these unsettling thoughts. She arrived on a crisp autumn morning, accompanied by a stern-faced woman introduced as Mrs. Albright, her maternal grandmother. Lyra Thorne was a solemn child, with her uncle's gray eyes and dark hair arranged in neat ringlets beneath a blue bonnet. She curtsied with perfect form when introduced to me, but said nothing, watching her new aunt with wary assessment. "Lyra has been most properly raised," Mrs. Albright informed me, her tone carrying a pointed emphasis that suggested she doubted the same could be said of the new Duchess. "She excels at her piano lessons and French studies, and her needlework is exceptional for a child of 5. "How impressive," I replied warmly, kneeling to Lyra's level, despite Mrs. Albright's visible disapproval of such informality. "I hope you'll play for me while you're visiting, Lyra. The music room here has a lovely pianoforte." The child glanced up at her grandmother, as if seeking permission to respond directly. "Perhaps you would like to show Lyra the gardens, Elara," Alaric suggested, his voice calm, but with an underlying current of command. "I believe Mrs. Beaumont has arranged for tea to be served in the conservatory afterward." I understood his intent immediately. He wished to separate the child from her grandmother's oppressive influence. Mrs. Albright began to object, a sharp intake of breath, but Alaric cut her off with an effortless authority that brooked no argument. "I am certain you must be fatigued from your journey, Mrs. Albright. Mr. Finch will show you to the blue guest room, where you can rest before dinner." The woman's lips thinned, a clear sign of displeasure, yet even she dared not contradict a duke in his own home. With a curt reminder to Lyra to mind her posture and not soil her dress, she allowed herself to be escorted away by the impassive butler. Once Mrs. Albright was out of sight, Alaric knelt beside his niece, his severe expression melting into a warmth I had never witnessed before. "Hello, little one." The transformation in Lyra was immediate and heartbreaking. Her formal posture crumbled as she flung herself into her uncle's arms. "Uncle Alaric, I've missed you terribly." He held her close, one large hand cradling the back of her head with surprising tenderness. "And I've missed you, Ellie. Have you been well?" The nickname, Ellie, and the obvious affection between them caught me by surprise. This was a side of Alaric I had not glimpsed in our brief marriage. Warm, gentle, almost vulnerable in his obvious love for his brother's child. Lyra pulled back, her small face suddenly serious. "Grandmother says I cannot come to live with you because you are a bachelor, and bachelors cannot raise little girls properly. But now you have a duchess, so I can stay, can't I?" Alaric glanced up at me, a silent communication passing between us that acknowledged the truth of our arrangement. "That is my hope, yes. And speaking of my duchess, I believe it is time you became better acquainted with her. She has been looking forward to meeting you." Lyra turned her solemn gaze to me, assessing me with a child's direct curiosity. "Are you a real duchess?" I smiled, charmed by the question. "I am indeed, though it is still quite new to me. Perhaps we could learn about being a duchess together." The child considered this proposal with surprising seriousness before nodding. "I would like that. Grandmother says duchesses must always be dignified, but you don't look very dignified when you kneel on the floor." A surprised laugh escaped me. "You are quite right, most unduchess-like of me. Shall we attempt to be dignified together in the garden? Or would you prefer to be undignified and perhaps find some interesting insects among the roses?" Lyra's eyes widened at this scandalous suggestion. "Grandmother says ladies never touch insects." "Does she indeed?" I rose and offered my hand to the child. Alaric stood watching us, an unreadable expression on his face. "Well, I find that grandmothers, while very wise in many matters, occasionally have curious ideas about what ladies may or may not do. For instance, my grandmother was convinced that ladies should never eat apples in public, which I always found most puzzling." A giggle escaped Lyra, a sound so unexpected and delightful that it brought an answering smile to Alaric's face. "I believe I shall leave you ladies to your garden exploration," he said, his usual formality returning. "Ellie, mind the Duchess, and remember that dinner is at 6, not 7, while you are visiting." As he turned to leave, Lyra called after him, "Will you read to me tonight, Uncle Alaric? The story about the knight and the dragon." Something flickered across his features, pain perhaps, or a memory. "Of course, little one, just as your father used to do." Once he had gone, I led Lyra into the garden, where the child gradually shed her formal demeanor, revealing a curious mind and a sweet disposition beneath the rigid training imposed by her grandmother. We found a few late blooms in the rose garden, their petals still clinging to summer's memory, despite the encroaching autumn chill. By the time we reached the conservatory for tea, Lyra was chattering about her favorite flowers and asking if we might search for interesting stones on the moors the following day. "And my papa used to collect stones," she confided as we sat among the potted palms, Lyra's feet swinging beneath her chair. "He had a special box for the prettiest ones." "Did he?" I poured milk into Lyra's tea, noting how the child's face lit up at the mention of her father. "What happened to his collection?" Lyra's expression clouded. "Grandmother said it was cluttering the house and had it put away. She said it wasn't proper for Papa's things to be left about, making everyone sad." I reached across the table to gently cover the child's small hand with my own. "Sometimes adults say such things because they themselves are very sad and don't know how to manage their feelings. But it's important to remember the people we've lost, even if remembering makes us a little sad sometimes." "Uncle Alaric has Papa's watch," Lyra said, brightening slightly. "He let me hold it once and showed me the inscription inside that Grandpa gave him." "That was kind of your uncle," Lyra nodded solemnly. "Uncle Alaric is very kind, even though Grandmother says he is dangerous and improper. I don't think he's dangerous at all, except perhaps to spiders. He removed one from my room once and wouldn't tell me if he had killed it or set it free." I bit back a smile at this assessment. "I believe your grandmother and many others may not understand your uncle very well. Do you understand him?" The question was posed with a child's directness, like a small, unexpected missive delivered straight to the heart. I considered my answer carefully. "Not entirely, but I hope to, given time." Papa said, Uncle Alaric has a heart bigger than the whole of Yorkshire, but hides it better than a fox hides its den. The insight, delivered in a child's voice, but clearly the words of Alaric's brother, struck me deeply. I looked across the conservatory to where the man in question had appeared in the doorway, watching us with that inscrutable expression he so often wore. Had I, like society, misjudged the Duke of Blackwood? Was there more to the man than the cold, calculating figure who had proposed our practical arrangement? What hidden truths might society's judgments often obscure, even from ourselves? The question lingered in my mind as Alaric approached to join us for tea, his manner warming perceptibly as Lyra recounted our garden adventures with animated enthusiasm. For the first time since our marriage, I found myself truly curious about the man I had wed, not as the shadow duke of society's gossip, but as the uncle who read dragon stories and removed spiders from little girls' rooms, the man who, according to his brother, possessed a heart larger than Yorkshire itself. October gave way to November, bringing with it the biting wind and gray skies for which Yorkshire was notorious. Within the stone walls of Ravenwood Abbey, I had settled into my role as Duchess with growing confidence, earning the respect of the staff and gradually making the imposing house feel more like a home. Mrs. Beaumont, initially so formal and reserved, had revealed a grandmother's indulgence toward Lyra. Mr. Finch, the stoic butler, could occasionally be caught slipping sweets into small hands when he thought no one was watching. Lyra's visit had concluded with promises of her return for Christmas, a prospect that brought genuine pleasure to me, who had developed a deep affection for the solemn little girl with her keen observations and hidden spark of mischief. The court proceedings regarding her guardianship continued, with Alaric making regular trips to London to consult with his solicitors. Each return brought cautious optimism. Our marriage had indeed strengthened his case considerably. Francis remained an enigma, unfailingly courteous but distant, joining me for dinner each evening, where we engaged in carefully neutral conversation about estate matters or London gossip. He never sought my company beyond these formal interactions, disappearing into his study or riding out across the moors for hours at a time. I found myself oddly disappointed by this strict adherence to the terms of our agreement. Though I had entered the marriage with no romantic expectations, some small, foolish part of me had hoped for companionship at least. It was after one such return, as I sat in the small morning room I had claimed as my private sanctuary, that a footman arrived with a silver salver bearing a visiting card. "Lady Isolde Ashford, your grace," he announced. "She asks if you are receiving callers this afternoon." I concealed my surprise behind a calm smile. "Yes, of course. Please show her ladyship to the blue drawing room and ask Mrs. Beaumont to arrange for tea." As the footman departed, I moved to the mirror above the fireplace, adjusting my hair and smoothing the skirts of my russet day dress. Lady Isolde's arrival was unexpected, and given the woman's known interest in Alaric before his sudden marriage, potentially awkward. The blue drawing room, with its elegant furnishings and views of the frosted gardens, provided a formal setting for our meeting. I entered to find Lady Isolde examining a porcelain figurine with critical interest. "Lady Isolde, what an unexpected pleasure." My voice was warm despite my weariness. Isolde turned, setting down the figurine with deliberate care. She was as beautiful as I remembered, golden-haired, blue-eyed, with the kind of perfect features that seemed almost mathematically designed to appeal. Her traveling costume was the height of fashion, the deep green velvet flattering to her complexion. "Duchess," Lady Isolde curtsied with perfect form, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How kind of you to receive me without notice. I was visiting cousins in the area and thought it only proper to pay my respects to Ravenwood's new mistress." "How thoughtful," I replied, gesturing toward the settee. "Please make yourself comfortable. Tea will arrive shortly." We settled into the elegant furniture. The silence between us, charged with unspoken tension, seemed to hum in the air. Isolde's gaze wandered the room, taking in the details of my domain with barely concealed assessment. "You've made changes to the drawing room," she observed. "I recall the curtains being blue brocade when I last visited." The implication that she had been a guest at Ravenwood before was not lost on me. Yes, I found some lovely gold silk in the attics that brightens the room considerably during our darker Yorkshire days. "How resourceful," The word carried a hint of condescension. Although I would have thought a duke's bride might prefer to order new furnishings rather than rummaging through attics. I smiled pleasantly. I find there's something satisfying in discovering hidden treasures already within one's home. The silk is of exceptional quality, far superior to what one might find in shops today. The arrival of tea provided a welcome interruption. As I poured, I noted the calculating look in Isolde's eyes. This was no casual social call. I must confess, Isolde said, accepting her cup, all of London was quite astonished by your marriage. The Duke of Blackwood's interest in you seemed to materialize rather abruptly. Love, my dear Duchess, Lady Isolde purred, her smile as sharp as the cut glass of her teacup. Surely we need not pretend with one another. Her laugh, a brittle sound like crystal breaking, echoed unnervingly in the blue drawing room. We both know what brought about this sudden union. A chill, sharper than any Yorkshire wind, pricked at my skin. I maintained my composure, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Do we, Lady Isolde? A child, she stated, her blue eyes glinting with quiet triumph. Or rather, the guardianship of one. His Grace required a wife to secure his claim to his niece, and you, with your family's financial difficulties, required security. A most convenient arrangement for you both. The brutal accuracy of her assessment was a physical blow, yet I refused to show it. The warmth in my cheeks was not embarrassment, but a surge of indignation. You seem remarkably well informed about the private affairs of both my family and my husband. London thrives on information, Duchess, and I make it my business to be well informed. Lady Isolde replied, setting down her cup with deliberate precision, particularly about matters concerning Alaric. The familiar use of his Christian name was a calculated provocation designed to wound. I met her gaze, keeping my own voice even. And why, may I ask, does my husband remain such a subject of interest to you, Lady Isolde? Surely your attention would be better directed toward your own matrimonial prospects. My interest is simple. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an intimate, insidious whisper. Alaric and I had an understanding, one that predates your hasty marriage, an understanding that remains unaltered by his temporary need for a convenient bride. A cold dread settled in my chest. Had he told me about their time together in Vienna last spring, or perhaps mentioned their correspondence over the summer? No, he had not. The possibility that Alaric maintained some relationship with Lady Isolde, even a past one, was both plausible and painful for reasons I did not wish to examine. Our marriage contract specified fidelity in public, but made no claims on private behavior once Lyra's guardianship was secured. My husband's past associations are precisely that, past, I replied, my voice steady despite the inner turmoil that threatened to unravel me. As his wife, I concern myself with our present and future. How admirably pragmatic, Lady Isolde's tone dripped with false admiration, though I wonder if you'll maintain such composure when Alaric resumes his customary habits. Men of his position often find that a wife serves certain social functions, while other companions fulfill different needs. Before I could formulate a response to this blatant insult, the drawing room door opened. Alaric himself stood there, his tall figure imposing in riding attire, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the wind. His expression darkened perceptibly as he took in the tableau before him, Lady Isolde leaning forward, her face alight with malice, and my own rigid posture. Lady Isolde, he acknowledged, his voice cold, stripped of all warmth. I was unaware we were expecting visitors. Lady Isolde rose, her demeanor transforming instantly to one of warm welcome. Alaric, how fortuitous. I was just becoming acquainted with your bride. Indeed, his gaze shifted to me, a question in his eyes that I couldn't fully interpret, though a flicker of concern seemed to pierce through his usual reserve. I trust my wife has been showing you every hospitality. The Duchess has been most gracious, Lady Isolde replied, her smile holding a secret meaning only she understood. We've been having such an illuminating conversation. I'm certain you have. Alaric moved to stand beside my chair, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder in a gesture that might have appeared affectionate to an observer, but felt possessive in its pressure, a silent declaration of ownership rather than warmth. Unfortunately, I must interrupt. The Duchess and I have a prior engagement this afternoon. Lady Isolde's perfect features registered momentary surprise before smoothing into practiced poise. How disappointing. I had hoped we might speak privately, Alaric, about the matter we discussed in London last month. Any business between us can be conducted through my solicitors, Lady Isolde. His tone was final, brooking no argument. Mr. Finch will see you out. I wish you a safe journey back to your cousins. The dismissal was unmistakable. Lady Isolde gathered her gloves with deliberate slowness. Of course. Another time, perhaps. She turned to me with a smile that held no warmth. Duchess, thank you for the tea. I do hope we'll meet again soon, perhaps in London for the Christmas season. I understand Ravenwood can be terribly isolated in winter. With a final lingering glance at Alaric, she swept out of the room, leaving a lingering scent of rosewater and subtle menace in her wake. After she had departed, the silence in the drawing room grew thick with unspoken questions. Alaric's hand remained on my shoulder for a moment longer, a weight I could not interpret as either supportive or constraining. It felt like a boundary, a line drawn against the world and perhaps against me. I apologize for the intrusion, he said finally, moving away to stand by the window, his back to me. Lady Isolde has a habit of appearing where she is not invited. She seems quite familiar with Ravenwood, I observed carefully, my voice steadier than I felt. And with you? Alaric's back stiffened. We have moved in the same social circles for years. Her father, the Earl of Ashford, was an associate of my father's. She spoke of Vienna and of correspondence between you. He turned, his expression guarded, his gray eyes like chips of flint. Did she indeed? And did you believe her insinuations? I met his gaze directly. I don't know what to believe, Alaric. Our arrangement has always been clear regarding its purpose, but not its boundaries. For a long moment, he studied my face, as if searching for something hidden there. Then he sighed, a sound so weary it seemed to carry the weight of years. Lady Isolde harbors certain expectations regarding her future that I have never encouraged. Whatever she implied about our relationship is a fiction of her own creation. She believes she will still become the Duchess of Blackwood, I stated, a dull ache beginning in my chest. A harsh laugh escaped him, devoid of humor. A title that is already occupied, as she has been clearly informed. For now, I said softly, the words feeling foreign even as I spoke them. Our agreement specified that once Lyra's guardianship is secured, you would be free to— I am aware of the terms, he interrupted, his voice sharp, almost brittle. As apparently is half of London society. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of frustration that revealed the depth of his agitation. Lady Isolde's visit was a calculated attempt to sow discord, nothing more. Yet her words were precise, I pressed. Her father's association with yours. Vienna. Correspondence. These are not mere fictions, are they? She hinted at darker matters, Alaric, of your brother's ruin. He clenched his jaw, his gaze fixing on the rain-streaked window, as if the answers lay somewhere in the bleak Yorkshire landscape. The Earl of Ashford was among the investors in the shipping venture that ruined my brother George. Whether he was complicit in the deception or merely another victim remains unclear. He finally looked at me, his eyes holding a bleakness I had never seen before. I believe my brother was encouraged to invest in a venture by men who knew it was doomed to fail. When he discovered their deception, he and Eleanor traveled to confront them. The boating accident occurred the day before that planned confrontation. The dim lamplight in the drawing room cast long, dancing shadows, making his features stark, almost skeletal. Was it grief or something else that so haunted him? Heavens, I breathed, the full horror of his words sinking in. You don't believe the boating accident was truly an accident? Nothing that would stand in a court of law. Not yet, Alaric replied, his voice low, a dangerous rumble in his chest. But I have been gathering evidence. His expression hardened, revealing a steel beneath the austere facade I had only glimpsed before. Those responsible will face justice one way or another. The vehemence in his tone revealed a depth of feeling Alaric rarely displayed. I understood suddenly that the cool, controlled exterior he presented to the world concealed powerful currents of emotion, grief, loyalty, and a fierce, unyielding sense of justice that drove him in ways society never glimpsed. Is that why you've cultivated your reputation as the Shadow Duke? I asked, a sudden clarity washing over me. To pursue this investigation without raising suspicion? Alaric regarded me with new interest, as if seeing me more clearly than ever before. Partly, yes. The reputation serves multiple purposes. People are careless around those they underestimate or fear. They reveal things they might otherwise conceal. He walked over to his desk, where a leather-bound ledger lay open, its pages filled with neat, precise entries, a silent testament to his meticulous investigations. It was clear now that his life, once seemingly distant and pragmatic, was woven with threads of deep personal sacrifice and a relentless pursuit of truth. The letter-wax seal motif of concealed information now made perfect, chilling sense. And Lady Isolde, I continued, piecing together the puzzle. Does she play some role in this investigation? His expression shuddered, becoming once more the Duke of Blackwood, formidable and unreadable. Lady Isolde's father, the Earl of Ashford, was indeed among the investors in the venture that ruined my brother. Whether he was complicit in the deception or merely another victim remains unclear. My connection to her, as you surmised, was initially strategic rather than personal. He closed the ledger, the soft thud echoing in the quiet study. Though I severed that connection entirely upon our marriage. Whatever Lady Isolde implied to you was wishful thinking on her part. Relief washed through me, stronger than I had anticipated, warming the cold dread in my chest. Thank you for explaining. I confess her visit left me unsettled. Alaric rose from his chair, moving to stand before the fire. The flames cast his profile in sharp relief against the shadows of the room, highlighting the stern lines of his jaw and the depth in his eyes. Our arrangement has asked much of you, Elara. You've left your family and friends to live in this isolated house with a man society considers dangerous and unpredictable. You've taken on responsibility for a child not your own, and you've done so with more grace than I had any right to expect. The honesty in his voice touched something deep within me, a chord of gratitude and burgeoning affection. He was not merely acknowledging my actions, but seeing me. The arrangement has benefited me as well, Alaric, I replied, setting aside my embroidery. My family's security is assured, and I hesitated, searching for words that would not reveal too much of my changing feelings, yet still conveyed the truth. I have found purpose here at Ravenwood that I never had in London ballrooms. He turned to face me, his expression softened by the firelight, a rare vulnerability in his gaze. Nevertheless, I am in your debt, a fact I do not acknowledge lightly. There is no debt between us, I replied, the words coming easily, sincerely. Only the terms of our agreement. Terms which I fear may have seemed cold and restrictive in retrospect. He took a step toward my chair, his presence suddenly filling the space between us. His voice dropped, becoming a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Perhaps those terms might benefit from reconsideration. My heart quickened at his words, at the intent in his eyes, at the sudden shift in the air that hummed with possibility. What sort of reconsideration did he have in mind? Before he could answer, a sharp, urgent knock at the study door interrupted the moment. Mr. Finch entered, his usual impassive expression troubled. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but a messenger has arrived from London with urgent news. Alaric straightened, all trace of vulnerability vanishing behind the familiar mask of the Duke. When? The day after tomorrow, Your Grace. The messenger says Lord and Lady Albright have petitioned for an immediate decision, claiming that the child's welfare is at stake. Your presence is required in London immediately. Have the carriage prepared. I'll leave within the hour. Alaric turned to me, his gaze sharp and focused once more. This is the Albrights' final attempt to undermine our claim. They know their position weakens with each passing day that Lyra is settled in our care. What can I do? I asked, rising to my feet, my mind already racing through practicalities. Alaric considered for a moment, his mind clearly working through multiple contingencies. Come with me to London. Your presence will strengthen our case, and Lyra will be comforted having both of us there. Of course. I'll have Miss Eliza pack immediately. The sudden urgency left no room for hesitation, no space for the tender reconsideration he had proposed. Lyra's future took precedence, as it should. The journey to London was long and arduous, made more difficult by heavy rains that turned the roads to mud and slowed their progress considerably. The carriage windows were streaked with moisture, blurring the familiar countryside into a somber watercolor. By the time we reached the Duke's London residence in Grosvenor Square, both Alaric and I were exhausted, a dull ache thrumming behind my eyes and deeply anxious about the hearing scheduled for the following morning. The rain, a relentless drumming on the carriage roof, felt like a mirror to the turbulent emotions swirling within me. Lyra was already there, having been brought from the Albrights' home by a court-appointed chaperone. The moment Alaric entered the drawing room, her small face lit up with joy, despite the uncertainty surrounding her future. She flew into his arms, a small bundle of fierce affection. "Uncle Alaric, Aunt Elara, I knew you would come." Alaric lifted her high, his severe expression melting into genuine warmth. "Of course we came, little one. Nothing could have kept us away." Lyra's gaze moved anxiously between us, her small brow furrowed. "Grandmother says the judge might make me stay with them forever. She says you're not suitable guardians because—" She hesitated, clearly repeating words she didn't fully understand. "Because your marriage is a sham and you don't truly care for each other." I exchanged a quick glance with Alaric, seeing my own alarm reflected in his eyes. The Albrights were playing a dangerous game, involving a child in adult manipulations, weaponizing her innocence. Kneeling beside Lyra, I took the little girl's hand in mine. "Lyra, sometimes adults say unkind things when they're afraid of losing someone they love. Your grandmother loves you very much and is frightened of changes, but you mustn't worry about what she says about us." "But is it true?" Lyra's gray eyes, so like her uncle's, searched my face with a child's devastating honesty. "Grandmother says you only married Uncle Alaric because he paid your family's debts." Alaric crouched beside us, his large hand gentle on Lyra's shoulder. "Lyra, listen to me. What exists between adults is often complicated and not easily explained to children. But I can promise you this. Your Aunt Elara and I have the deepest respect for one another, and we both love you dearly. Our home at Ravenwood is waiting for you, and we very much want you to live there with us." The child's expression remained troubled. "But do you love each other? Mom and Papa loved each other. They were always laughing and holding hands, even when they thought I wasn't looking." I felt Alaric tense beside me, clearly struggling for an answer that would reassure Lyra without being an outright lie. He was a man of integrity, even in a marriage of convenience. Before he could respond, I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his in a gesture that felt both foreign and strangely right, a silent promise to Lyra, and perhaps to ourselves. "Love comes in many forms, Lyra," I said softly, my voice infused with a truth I was only just discovering, "and it often grows over time, like a garden that becomes more beautiful with each passing season. Your uncle and I may not have had the same beginning as your parents, but that doesn't mean our story is any less true." Alaric's fingers tightened around mine, a silent acknowledgement of my careful words. "To Lyra," he added, his voice softened with genuine emotion, "your Aunt Elara is very wise, little one. Now why don't you show her the new doll the court chaperone brought you, while I speak with Mr. Hargrove about tomorrow's hearing?" The Duke's study, usually a sanctuary of order, felt fraught with tension that late evening. Rain lashed against the window panes, blurring the London cityscape into a watery abstraction, much like the clear lines of our practical arrangement now seemed to blur. Mr. Hargrove, Alaric's solicitor, a man with sharp, discerning eyes and whiskers as gray as the storm outside, laid out the grim truth without preamble. "The Albrights," he began, tapping a neatly bound stack of papers on the desk, an open ledger still visible beneath it, "are claiming that your marriage, your grace, is a mere contrivance, designed solely to influence the court. They have presented affidavits from several London acquaintances testifying to your grace's bachelor habits and, shall we say, sudden and unexpected interest in Miss Vance." My stomach churned at the word sham. Alaric paced before the crackling fire, his shadow stretching and shrinking on the wall with each stride. "My personal history is irrelevant to my ability to provide a stable home for Lyra," he growled, his voice a low rumble. Mr. Hargrove, however, remained unmoved. "On the contrary, your grace, it is highly relevant. A child, particularly a female child, requires moral guidance and stability. The Albrights are positioning themselves as the conventional, respectable option. He paused, looking between us. And us, your grace? As what? Immoral? Disreputable? I asked, indignation coloring my voice. They are suggesting, your grace, Hargrove clarified, his tone sympathetic but firm, that your union lacks the foundation necessary for a stable household, and that it is likely to dissolve once its immediate purpose is served. My heart pounded, not from fear for myself, but for Lyra. To secure Lyra's guardianship, he concluded, you must present yourselves as a united couple, with genuine affection and commitment to one another. The weight of his words settled upon us, heavy and undeniable. After the solicitor departed, the study fell silent, save for the drumming of rain and the hiss of the fire. Alaric poured himself a glass of brandy, his back to me. This complicates matters, he stated, his voice devoid of its usual controlled cadence, betraying a rare vulnerability. I turned from the window, the streaks of rain on the glass, a reflection of my own turbulent thoughts. It changes nothing, Francis, I corrected, using his given name almost without thinking. We agreed to present ourselves as a conventional marriage to the world. Tomorrow simply requires a more convincing performance. My own pragmatism surprised me. He turned then, studying me over the rim of his glass, the lamplight casting long shadows and unexpected warmth across his features. You're remarkably pragmatic about all this. Did you expect hysterics? A small smile curved my lips, a genuine one this time. I understood the nature of our arrangement from the beginning, Francis. Tomorrow we shall simply emphasize certain aspects of it more prominently than others. He set down his glass, crossing the room until he stood before me. The air grew thick with unspoken meaning. You continue to surprise me, Elara Vance. My breath caught in my throat. Elara Thorne, I corrected gently, the name now feeling like a cloak I had willingly donned. A name I accepted with full understanding of its obligations and privileges. His hand rose, hesitating for a fraction of a second, before brushing a loose strand of hair back from my face. It was a gesture of such unexpected intimacy that my composure nearly shattered. It needn't be entirely pretense, I found myself saying, my voice softer than intended. I have developed a genuine regard for you, Francis. Whatever brought us together initially, these months at Ravenwood have shown me a man of principle and depth that society never sees. Surprise flickered in his gray eyes, quickly followed by something warmer, something akin to wonder. And I, he began, his voice lowering to a timbre that seemed to vibrate through my very bones, have discovered that the quiet wallflower of London ballrooms possesses more courage and character than most who command the spotlight. His hand lingered near my face, his thumb tracing the curve of my cheekbone. Perhaps Hargrove is right. Perhaps what began as convenience has become something more substantial. The moment hung between us, charged with a possibility so exhilarating it stole my breath. Then, with careful deliberation, Francis leaned forward. He pressed his lips to mine. A kiss so gentle it might have been imagined, yet so profound it seemed to alter the very air around us. It was a fragile whisper, a tentative promise. When he drew back, his eyes searched mine, questioning. I answered by reaching up to touch his face, my fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. For Lyra, I whispered, though we both recognized the words as only partially true. For Lyra, he agreed, his gaze steady. The courtroom was imposing. Oak paneling gleamed under the chandeliers. High ceilings created an echo of solemn authority, and the weight of centuries of legal precedent seemed to press down upon us. I sat beside Francis in the front row, my gloved hand resting in his, our shoulders nearly touching in a tableau of marital unity. Across the aisle, Lord and Mrs. Albright observed us with barely concealed hostility, their faces etched with a grief that I could, despite their cruelty, understand. Lyra, mercifully, was spared this public scrutiny, waiting with the court chaperone in a small antechamber. Francis had been adamant that she be shielded from as much of this unpleasantness as possible. Judge Blackwood, a stern-faced man whose reputation for fairness was matched only by his intolerance for deception, reviewed the documents before him with methodical care. The silence in the courtroom stretched, taut as a bowstring, as we awaited his attention. This case, he began finally, his voice resonating with practiced authority, concerns the guardianship of Miss Lyra Thorne, orphan daughter of Lord George Thorne, and Lady Catherine Thorne, née Albright. He peered over his spectacles at both parties. Both maternal and paternal relations petitioned for custody, each claiming to offer the most suitable home for the child. The light from the chandeliers seemed to intensify, highlighting the gravity of his words. Lord and Lady Albright claimed primary consideration based on their biological relationship to the child's mother and their established household. His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood, and Her Grace, the Duchess, claimed consideration based on the Duke's position as the child's paternal uncle and his brother's appointed guardian in the event of his death. The proceedings continued, a tedious dance of legal arguments. Mr. Hargrove, our solicitor, presented our case with eloquence, emphasizing Francis's legal right as named guardian, his considerable financial resources, and the stable home he and I had established at Ravenwood. His words, though persuasive, felt sterile compared to the vibrant life we were creating. The Albright solicitor countered with insinuations about Francis's character, carefully crafted half-truths, and the hasty nature of our marriage. He stopped just short of openly calling it a sham, but the implication hung heavy in the air, a poisonous miasma. I felt Francis's hand tighten around mine, his knuckles white with tension. He was a man accustomed to command, not to having his character dissected in public. I stroked my thumb across the back of his hand in a small, almost imperceptible gesture of reassurance, feeling his grip relax slightly in response. My own indignation flared, but I held it in check, maintaining the serene composure I had learned from years of social invisibility. The judge's gaze, however, was unwavering. "Your Grace," Judge Blackwood addressed Francis directly, his voice cutting through the hushed courtroom. "These allegations regarding the nature of your marriage are troubling. While it is not this court's place to evaluate the personal feelings between husband and wife, the stability of your union directly impacts Miss Lyra's welfare. How do you respond to the suggestion that your marriage was arranged hastily and solely for the purpose of this guardianship petition?" Francis rose, his bearing every inch the Duke, his tall frame seeming to fill the space. "My lord, I acknowledge that my courtship of the former Miss Vance was brief by conventional standards. However, I reject entirely the implication that our union lacks substance or commitment." He glanced down at me then, his expression softening visibly, a rare vulnerability in his austere features. I had observed Miss Vance for several seasons and found in her qualities I admired: dignity, intelligence, and a quiet strength of character. When my brother's death placed me in the position of seeking guardianship for Lyra, I recognized that the time had come to establish my own household. I chose a wife not merely for appearance's sake, but as a genuine life partner, with whom I could provide Lyra the stable, loving home she deserves. The judge's expression remained skeptical. "Yet you had shown no previous inclination toward marriage, despite being of an age where most men of your station have long since established families." Francis met the judge's gaze without flinching. "I had not found the right woman," he replied simply. "In Elara, I recognized someone who would complement my strengths and compensate for my weaknesses. Someone who could bring warmth to Ravenwood and guidance to Lyra that I alone could not provide." His gaze, so often guarded, settled on me, conveying a silent promise. "And you, your Grace?" Judge Blackwood turned his attention to me. "What drew you to accept the Duke's proposal after 5 seasons without forming an attachment?" I rose beside Francis, my hand still clasped in his, drawing strength from his steady presence. "My lord, I had indeed spent several seasons without forming an attachment, but not for lack of opportunity." A small, faint smile touched my lips. "Rather, I found myself unwilling to accept proposals based solely on practical considerations without the foundation of mutual respect and shared values." I turned to look at Francis, finding it surprisingly easy to infuse my voice with genuine warmth. "In His Grace, I discovered a man of principle and depth behind the facade society observes. A man devoted to his family and determined to honor his brother's memory by raising Lyra with the love and guidance she deserves. Our courtship may have been unconventional, but our commitment to creating a stable, loving home for Lyra and for each other is entirely genuine." The honesty in my words, the conviction in my gaze, seemed to hang in the quiet courtroom. Something shifted in Judge Blackwood's expression then, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his stern mouth. I see. Judge Blackwood's tone was less severe. And how has the child responded to your household? I understand she has visited Ravenwood on several occasions. Francis nodded, confidence returning to his posture. Lyra has flourished during her visits, my lord. She and her grace have developed a particularly close bond, sharing interests in music and nature that have helped Lyra begin to process her grief in healthy ways. The child is simply being polite, Lady Albright interjected, unable to contain herself, her voice shrill with indignation. She has been raised to show proper respect to her elders, regardless of her true feelings. Judge Blackwood's frown deepened, silencing her with its sheer authority. Lady Albright, you will have your opportunity to speak. Until then, I must ask you to remain silent. He turned back to Francis, a brief nod acknowledging his words. Finally, Judge Blackwood called for Lyra herself to be brought in. She entered, looking small and vulnerable in her black morning dress, her dark curls neatly arranged beneath a matching ribbon. She curtsied to the judge with perfect form, her solemn face a mask of careful politeness. Miss Thorne, the judge began, his tone gentler than it had been throughout the proceedings. I have just a few questions for you, and I want you to answer them honestly. There are no wrong answers. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Lyra replied, her voice barely audible in the large room. You have spent time in both your grandparents' home and at Ravenwood with your uncle and his wife. Can you tell me how you feel about each place? Lyra glanced nervously at her grandmother, then at Francis and me. Grandmother and grandfather Albright have a very nice house in London. It has pretty furniture and a garden with roses. And how do you feel when you are there? The judge prompted. The child hesitated, clearly struggling between honesty and the desire to please. I try to be very good there, she said finally. Grandmother says little girls should be seen and not heard, so I practice sitting still and speaking only when spoken to. I see. And at Ravenwood? Lyra's face transformed, a genuine smile replacing her careful composure, a beacon of light in the formal room. Ravenwood is wonderful. Uncle Francis lets me ride my pony, and Aunt Elara reads stories with me in all the different voices. We collect interesting stones on the moors, and I'm learning to play the pianoforte in the music room. And last time, we built a fort in the library using cushions and blankets, and Uncle Francis pretended to be a dragon trying to capture the princess. A ripple of surprised laughter ran through the courtroom at this image of the austere Duke of Blackwood engaged in imaginative play. I felt Francis stiffen beside me, but when I glanced at him, his expression held only tender affection as he regarded his niece. That sounds enjoyable indeed, Judge Blackwood said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. One final question, Miss Lyra. If you could choose where to live, where would that be? Lyra's smile faded, her small face growing serious once more. I would live at Ravenwood with Uncle Francis and Aunt Elara, she said without hesitation. But I would visit grandmother and grandfather sometimes too, if they wouldn't be too angry with me for choosing. Lady Albright made a small sound of distress, quickly stifled behind her handkerchief. Lord Albright placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm, his expression grim but resigned. Judge Blackwood nodded, thanking Lyra and instructing the chaperone to return her to the antechamber. Once the child had departed, he surveyed the courtroom thoughtfully. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I am prepared to render my decision. He straightened in his chair, his voice resuming its formal cadence. It is the finding of this court that primary guardianship of Miss Lyra Thorne shall be granted to His Grace, Francis Thorne, Duke of Blackwood, and Her Grace, Elara Thorne, Duchess of Blackwood, in accordance with the expressed wishes of the late Lord George Thorne. A wave of relief washed through me, so powerful I might have swayed had Francis not steadied me with a strong arm around my waist. However, the judge continued, raising a hand to silence the murmurs that had broken out. This court recognizes the importance of maintaining connections with both maternal and paternal relations. Therefore, Lord and Lady Albright shall be granted visitation rights to be exercised at Ravenwood or at their London residence for a period not to exceed 1 week per quarter, unless all parties agree to alternative arrangements. The judgment was fair, fairer than either side had expected, given the acrimony that had developed between us. As the court adjourned, I watched Lord Albright approach Francis with visible effort at dignity. "Your Grace, we," he began, clearly struggling for words. "We only wanted what was best for our granddaughter." Francis regarded him steadily. "As did I, Lord Albright. Perhaps we can agree that Lyra's welfare transcends our personal differences?" "Indeed," Albright hesitated, then continued with palpable difficulty. "My wife, her grief over Catherine's death has made her less reasonable than she might otherwise be. In time, I hope we may establish a more amicable relationship for Lyra's sake." "That would be my preference as well," Francis replied, his tone measured, but not unkind. The anteroom, with its somber court-appointed chaperone, seemed to lighten with our entry. Lyra looked up from the book she clutched, her gray eyes wide with an apprehension that twisted my heart. "Is it over? Did the judge decide?" Alaric knelt before her, his stern features softened by a profound tenderness I was coming to know. He took her small hands in his. "Yes, little one. The judge has decided that you will come to live with us at Ravenwood, as your father wished." Lyra's face lit with a joy so pure it felt like a physical warmth. "Truly? Forever?" "Forever," I confirmed, kneeling beside Alaric, feeling his shoulder brush mine, a silent acknowledgement of our shared victory. "You'll have your own room, just as we discussed, the one with the window seat overlooking the rose garden." "And can I bring my books and my collection of pressed flowers?" she asked, her voice brimming with excitement. "Every last one," Alaric promised, his gaze meeting mine in a moment of shared elation. "And anything else you wish to have with you." Lyra launched herself into our arms, her small body trembling with emotion. "I knew the judge would understand. I told him the truth, just as you said I should." Alaric's voice was thick with feeling as he held her close. "You were very brave, Ellie. Your father would have been proud." Later that afternoon, back in the quiet sanctuary of Alaric's London study, a message arrived from Lord and Lady Albright. They requested permission to see Lyra before they departed London the following day. My gaze met Alaric's across the expanse of his desk. "I believe we should invite them to dine this evening," he stated, his voice even, though I knew the suggestion was not made lightly. "Are you certain?" I asked quietly, my brow furrowed. "It may be rather strained." "Undoubtedly," he conceded, running a hand through his dark hair. "But for Lyra's sake, we must establish civil relations with the Albrights. She should not be made to feel she must choose between her maternal and paternal families." His consideration for Lyra's emotional well-being, even at the cost of his own comfort, touched me deeply. He was right, of course. "I'll speak with Mrs. Daniels about dinner arrangements," I replied, a quiet sense of purpose settling over me. The path to a true family required more than legal victories. It demanded an uneasy truce, forged with grace and genuine effort. The dinner was, as predicted, a strained affair. Lady Albright maintained a rigid formality, her disappointment at the court's decision barely concealed behind polite but brittle conversation. Lord Albright, however, made visible efforts at conciliation, engaging Alaric in conversation about estate management and inquiring politely about my impressions of Yorkshire. Lyra, dressed in her best frock and on her most exemplary behavior, watched the adults with obvious relief as the meal progressed without open hostility. "Perhaps, Lyra, you might show your grandparents the drawing you made this afternoon," I suggested gently, seeing an opportunity. The child eagerly retrieved a crumpled sheet from the morning room. "It's Ravenwood," she explained proudly, presenting the childish but recognizable sketch. "See, that's Uncle Francis and Aunt Elara, and that's me, and that's my pony, Starlight." Lady Albright's frozen expression thawed slightly as she examined the drawing. "You've included quite a lot of detail, Lyra. Your art lessons have clearly been beneficial." "Aunt Elara has been teaching me," Lyra replied, beaming at me. "She draws very well. She's going to help me make a book of all the flowers we find on the moors when spring comes." "Perhaps," I suggested, my voice soft but clear, acknowledging the delicate situation, "you could make a similar book of London flowers during your visits with your grandparents. The parks have many varieties that don't grow in Yorkshire." Lady Albright met my gaze for a long moment, the candlelight in the dining room reflecting the subtle shift in her expression, before inclining her head in a slight nod of acceptance. That would be most educational, she said stiffly, yet without the bitter edge that had characterized her earlier comments. Your grandfather and I maintain a small greenhouse that you might find interesting as well. It was a beginning, fragile and tentative, but a beginning nonetheless. By the time the Albrights departed, arrangements had been made for Lyra to visit them for a week after Easter, a compromise that seemed to satisfy all parties. You handled that admirably, Alaric commented as we stood together in the entrance hall after seeing them to their carriage. The lamplight cast his profile in shadows, his expression thoughtful. Lady Albright is not an easy woman to appease. She is a grandmother who feared losing her last connection to her daughter, I replied, my gaze lingering on the closed door. I can understand her fear, even if I don't condone her methods. Alaric studied my face, his gray eyes piercing. You continue to surprise me with your compassion, Elara. Is compassion so surprising a quality in a duchess? I asked lightly, a faint smile touching my lips. In my experience, yes. His expression grew more serious. In my world, people typically act from self-interest rather than empathy. You are an anomaly. Before I could respond to this unexpected assessment, a small voice interrupted us from the top of the stairs. Lyra appeared at the top of the stairs in her nightgown, her nurse hovering anxiously behind her. I'm sorry, Your Grace. Mrs. Pierce apologized, her voice hushed. Miss Lyra insisted on saying goodnight again before retiring. It's quite all right, Mrs. Pierce, I assured her with a warm smile. We'll bring her up in a moment. Lyra descended the stairs carefully, her bare feet peeking beneath her white nightgown. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a dream, she confessed, looking up at us with solemn eyes, that I'm really coming to live with you. Alaric lifted her into his arms with easy strength, holding her close. It's not a dream, little one. It's very real. And you won't change your minds? A shadow of anxiety crossed her small face. Even if I'm not always perfectly behaved? Especially then, I said, smoothing a dark curl from the child's forehead. Families don't stop loving each other because of imperfections. In fact, sometimes it's our very imperfections that make us most lovable. Lyra considered this wisdom with a furrowed brow. Then a small smile touched her lips. Like how Uncle Francis scowls when he's thinking hard, but it doesn't mean he's angry, or how you hum without knowing it when you're reading something interesting. Alaric's eyes met mine, a surprised laugh escaping me at her keen observation. Precisely like that, I confirmed. Alaric carried Lyra back to her room, with me following close behind. Together we tucked her into bed, listened to her prayers, and promised once more that we would all travel to Ravenwood together in 2 days' time. As we closed the nursery door behind us, Alaric's hand brushed against mine, then deliberately captured my fingers in a gentle clasp. We walked in silence to the landing, the contact between us speaking more eloquently than words. She notices more than we realize, I observed quietly. Your scowls, my humming. Children often see what adults overlook. Alaric's thumb traced a small pattern against my palm. Lyra has always been particularly observant. George used to say she had old eyes and a young face. You miss him very much, I said, not as a question, but a quiet statement. Alaric answered anyway. Every day, George was the better of us in many ways, more open, more trusting. His expression darkened slightly. I've spent the month since his death focused on securing justice for him and security for Lyra. I've had little time to simply grieve. The admission, delivered in a voice stripped of its usual control, revealed the depth of feeling Alaric typically concealed behind his austere facade. Impulsively, I reached up to touch his face, my fingers gentle against his cheek. Perhaps now you can, I suggested softly, now that Lyra's future is secure. His hand came up to cover mine, pressing my palm more firmly against his skin. Perhaps I can, with your help. The moment stretched between us, intimate and weighted with possibility. Then Alaric cleared his throat, letting my hand fall, but keeping my fingers entwined with his. It's been a long day. Shall I escort you to your room? The Duke's London residence, unlike Ravenwood Abbey, had been arranged with a conventional aristocratic marriage in mind. Our bedchambers were joined through a connecting door that had remained firmly closed during our previous stays. As we reached my door, an awkward silence fell between us. Well, I said finally, my voice a little too brisk. Good night then. Alaric hesitated, conflict visible in his expression. Elara, today in the courtroom, the things we said about our marriage were necessary for Lyra's sake. I finished for him, uncertainty making my voice more abrupt than intended. I understand completely. No, he interrupted, his voice low and intense, his gaze never leaving mine. That's not what I meant to say at all. His hand came up to cradle my face, his touch gentle despite the tension in his body. What I said in that courtroom was not merely for show. These past months with you have been transformative. My breath caught in my throat. Alaric, please, please let me finish. His thumb traced the curve of my cheekbone, sending shivers through me. When I proposed our arrangement, I saw you as a solution to a problem, a practical choice for a specific purpose. I did not expect to discover a woman of such depth and character behind the quiet exterior you present to the world. I did not expect to find myself thinking of you throughout the day, looking forward to our conversations over dinner, admiring your kindness toward Lyra and your skill in managing Ravenwood. He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what came next. In short, I did not expect to develop feelings that far transcend our original agreement. The confession hung in the air between us, altering everything with its honesty. I searched his face, finding none of the calculation or strategic thinking that had characterized our early interactions, only vulnerable sincerity. I have feelings for you too, I admitted quietly, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. Feelings I never anticipated when I accepted your proposal. Relief washed across his features, followed by something warmer, something like profound hope. Then perhaps we might consider renegotiating the terms of our arrangement. A smile curved my lips, a genuine one that reached my eyes. What terms did you have in mind, Your Grace? Instead of answering with words, Alaric lowered his head and captured my mouth with his. Unlike the gentle, tentative kiss we had shared in London, this was a kiss of certainty and awakening desire, deep, thorough, and transformative. When we finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Alaric rested his forehead against mine. I would like to court my own wife, Elara Thorne, properly this time, with no practical considerations beyond my genuine desire to know you better. Joy bubbled up within me, light and effervescent. I believe I would like that very much. His answering smile, rare and unguarded, transformed his austere features into something approaching boyish charm. Then we are agreed, a new arrangement, based on mutual regard rather than mutual advantage. Although, I added with a teasing lilt, I see no reason why we cannot have both. Alaric laughed, the sound warm and genuine in the quiet corridor. Indeed, a most sensible approach, Duchess. With a final lingering kiss, he bid me good night, both of us understanding that while our relationship had irrevocably changed, we had time now to explore its new dimensions at our own pace, without the pressure of Lyra's custody hanging over us. As I prepared for bed, assisted by Miss Eliza, I found myself humming softly, exactly as Lyra had observed earlier, a physical manifestation of the happiness that seemed too large to contain within my chest. How you seem in good spirits, Your Grace, Miss Eliza commented as she brushed out my long hair, her eyes twinkling in the mirror's reflection. I take it the court proceedings went well. Very well indeed, I replied, my smile visible in the mirror. Lyra will be coming to Ravenwood permanently. The staff will be delighted to hear it. Mrs. Beaumont has already begun preparations for the child's room. As Miss Eliza departed and I slipped beneath the bed covers, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been the invisible Miss Vance, resigned to spinsterhood and a lifetime of quiet desperation. Now I was the Duchess of Blackwood, mistress of Ravenwood Abbey, guardian to a delightful child, and most unexpectedly of all, the object of genuine affection from a man I had come to admire deeply. A marriage that had begun as a practical arrangement had transformed into something far more meaningful. What tomorrow might bring, I could not know. But for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I faced the future with genuine optimism. Spring came to Ravenwood Abbey in a riot of wildflowers across the moors, and tender green shoots in the formal gardens. Lyra, fully settled into her new home, flourished under the combined influence of Alaric's steady guidance and my gentle encouragement. The child's nightmares, which had been frequent in the early weeks after her arrival, gradually subsided as security and routine worked their healing magic on her young spirit. The household itself seemed to breathe more easily, as if the ancient stones of Ravenwood had been waiting for the sound of a child's laughter to echo through its halls. Mrs. Beaumont, initially so formal and reserved, revealed a grandmother's indulgence toward Lyra, while Mr. Finch could occasionally be caught slipping sweets into small hands when he thought no one was watching. The quiet house, once so imposing, now lived and breathed with the warmth of a true family. Spring came to Ravenwood in a riot of wildflowers across the moors and tender green shoots in the formal gardens. Lyra, fully settled into her new home, flourished under the combined influence of Alaric's steady guidance and my gentle encouragement. The child's nightmares, which had been frequent in the early weeks after her arrival, gradually subsided as security and routine worked their healing magic on her young spirit. The household itself seemed to breathe more easily, as if the ancient stones of Ravenwood had been waiting for the sound of a child's laughter to echo through its halls, a melody more beautiful than any played in a London ballroom illuminated by candlelight. Mrs. Beaumont, initially so formal and reserved, revealed a grandmother's indulgence toward Lyra, while Mr. Finch could occasionally be caught slipping sweets into small hands when he thought no one was watching. As for Alaric and me, our relationship blossomed in the warming days of spring. True to his word, Alaric courted his wife with the attention and consideration he had not shown during our hasty engagement. We rode together across the estate, I on a gentle mare he had selected specifically for me, he on his powerful black stallion. We spent evenings in the music room, where my modest piano skills improved under his surprisingly patient tutelage. We read aloud to one another from favorite books, discovering shared tastes in literature and poetry. Most significantly, we truly talked, about our pasts, our hopes, our fears. What was this quiet understanding growing between us, blooming like the wild roses on the moor? Alaric gradually revealed the complex man behind the Shadow Duke's forbidding reputation. He was a man shaped by the early loss of his mother, a distant father's impossible expectations, and a fierce loyalty to the brother who had been his one true ally in a world of social calculation and betrayal. His guarded expression eased as he spoke, the firelight in the library softening the sharp planes of his face, making him appear less formidable, more human. He spoke of the heavy mantle of responsibility he had assumed too young, the constant need to project an image of unshakable strength to withstand attacks from all sides. The secrets he had kept, the burdens he had carried alone, now found a quiet sanctuary in the shared space between us. I saw not a cold pragmatist, but a man scarred by loss, driven by a profound sense of justice and yearning for connection. His voice, usually so measured, occasionally held a tremor of raw emotion when speaking of his brother George, the only one who had truly seen him. It was a privilege to witness such vulnerability, a testament to the fragile trust that had begun to build between us. In turn, I shared the quiet humiliations of my family's declining fortunes, the painful awareness of being overlooked in a society that valued wealth and connections above character, and my determination to maintain dignity despite circumstances beyond my control. I spoke of the ballrooms where I had sat, a wallflower watching life pass me by, yet learning to observe the true nature of people. Alaric listened with an attentiveness that touched me deeply, his gaze thoughtful, never dismissive. He understood the sting of invisibility, the resilience required to endure unspoken judgments. My candid confessions seemed to forge a new layer of respect between us, a recognition of shared struggles and an appreciation for the quiet strengths we each possessed. We were two disparate souls, one forged in the crucible of public scrutiny, the other in the shadows of neglect, finding common ground in our unexpected union. Our physical relationship progressed at a pace that honored both propriety and our growing feelings. The connecting door between our chambers, once firmly closed, a physical symbol of our practical arrangement, now stood ajar more often than not. Kisses that began as gentle expressions of affection grew deeper, more passionate, exploring the new territory of mutual desire with careful consideration. The soft lamplight of our rooms seemed to embrace us, offering a tender glow to our unfolding intimacy. Alaric, I discovered, was as thorough and attentive in this aspect of our relationship as he was in all others, learning what pleased me with the same focused intensity he brought to his business affairs, but with a tenderness that belied his public reputation for coldness. It was a dance of discovery, each touch, each whispered breath, a new step in a melody we were composing together. The culmination of our courtship came on a perfect May evening as we walked together through the rose garden, now in full and fragrant bloom, their scent heavy in the cool air. Lyra had been tucked into bed hours before. The household had retired for the night, and we found ourselves blissfully alone beneath a canopy of stars. "Do you remember the night we met?" Alaric asked as we paused beside a particularly lovely white rose, its petals luminous in the moonlight. "At the Harrington Hall ball?" "Of course, sir," I replied, a small smile touching my lips at the memory. "I thought you must be approaching someone behind me. I couldn't imagine why the Duke of Blackwood would seek out the invisible Miss Vance." He took my hands in his expression serious in the silvery light. "You were never invisible to me, Elara. Even then, watching you from across crowded ballrooms, I noticed your quiet dignity, the intelligence in your eyes, the way you observed everything without judgment or malice." "You never approached me in all those seasons," I reminded him, my voice soft. "Not until you needed a wife for a very specific purpose." "A failure of courage, perhaps," he admitted, his honesty surprising me still. "Or a belief that I had nothing to offer a woman beyond my title and fortune, neither of which seemed likely to impress someone who valued substance over appearance." "And now?" I prompted gently, my heart quickening. Alaric drew me closer, his arms encircling my waist. "Now I find myself hoping that what I've become in these months with you, a better guardian to Lyra, a more conscientious master to the estate's people, a man learning to balance justice with mercy, might be worthy of a woman like you, Elara. I love you, Elara." The words, spoken with quiet certainty, hung in the night air between us, as profound as any storm that ever broke over the moors. "Not for your practicality or your usefulness, though I value both. I love your compassion, your resilience, your quiet strength. I love the way you've transformed Ravenwood from a house into a home. I love that you've helped me become the man my brother always believed I could be." Tears pricked at my eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. "I love you too, Alaric, for your integrity, your devotion to Lyra, your hidden gentleness that so few are privileged to see, for showing me that I am neither invisible nor unworthy of regard." The kiss we shared beneath the stars held all the promise of our future: passion and tenderness, strength and vulnerability. A union forged initially from necessity, but transformed by genuine love into something far more enduring. Later, as moonlight filtered through the curtains of my bedchamber, Alaric held me close against his heart, our bodies entwined in the intimate aftermath of shared passion. "I have something for you," he murmured, reaching toward the nightstand. "I've been waiting for the right moment." He pressed a small velvet box into my hand. I opened it to find a ring of exquisite design, an oval sapphire surrounded by diamonds set in platinum. "It was my mother's," Alaric explained, his voice soft with memory. "My father gave it to her when I was born, their first child. She always said it represented their transformation from a marriage of convenience into a union of genuine love." "It's beautiful," I whispered, deeply moved by both the gesture and its symbolism. I thought perhaps a renewal of our vows this summer, not the hasty ceremony we had in London, but a true celebration here at Ravenwood, with Lyra as our attendant and the estate's people as our witnesses. The suggestion touched me deeply, a new beginning, a continuation, he corrected gently, as he slipped the ring onto my finger beside his signet ring that I already wore, "of what began as strategy, but has become the greatest blessing of my life." I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment, from the invisible wallflower to the beloved Duchess, from the feared shadow Duke to the devoted husband and guardian, from a marriage of convenience to a union of hearts. I sat alone at every ball for 5 years, I mused, looking up into his beloved face, recalling the glint of candlelight off the crystals, until the most feared Duke in England whispered, "Dance with me." "And what a dance it has been," Alaric replied, drawing me close once more. "One I hope never ends." In the soft darkness of our shared Ravenwood, with the promise of tomorrow right before them, the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood continued their dance. No longer strangers bound by a contract, but partners united by genuine, enduring love. Dear listener, the stories that touch our hearts are rarely mere fantasies. They are reflections of life's deepest truths. Elara and Alaric's journey reminds us that it's never too late to find love and purpose, even when we believe our time has passed. Like Elara, perhaps you felt that life has moved on without you, that you've remained invisible while others danced. Know that your story is still being written. The value you carry doesn't diminish with age or missed opportunities. In fact, the wisdom and strength you've cultivated through years of quiet dignity may be precisely what makes you extraordinary. In our modern world, where youth and instant connection are often prized above all else, remember that the most meaningful relationships can begin unexpectedly and blossom slowly. True connections, whether romantic partnerships, friendships, or family bonds, are built on understanding, respect, and the courage to be vulnerable. As you settle into sleep tonight, carry with you the comfort that second chances exist, that what appears to be an ending may actually be a beginning, that the qualities others have overlooked may be exactly what someone else has been searching for all along. May you find peace in knowing that your worth isn't determined by society's attention, but by the integrity and compassion with which you move through the world. May you recognize the beauty of your own quiet strength. And what unexpected dance might life yet invite you to join?